Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
So hi students, hope you all are doing well. Welcome to a very exciting session of a new course, Soft Tissue Characterization and Applications. I welcome you all to this course. Whether you are a biomedical engineer, you're a biotechnologist, you're working in some domain in healthcare, or you are involved with research in biomechanics, biosciences and bioengineering. This course is going to be extremely beneficial for all your future endeavors. So let us get started. I am Dr. Arnab Chanda from IIT Delhi. I am also a joint faculty with AIIMS Delhi, both from the Center for Biomedical Engineering and the Department of Biomedical Engineering, right? So let us get started with the contents. So as far as the contents are concerned, this is the first of its kind course in the country which aims to educate students on the biomechanical properties of soft tissues, right? So any soft tissue which you see from the head to toe, we are going to educate you in what are the properties, how to characterize those properties, and how to use these properties for various applications which you may encounter in the healthcare space, right? This could be skin, this could be the human brain. So every form of tissue in different organs from the head to toe, right? The techniques to study soft tissue characteristics experimentally and computationally will be discussed in great detail. Okay. So what are experiments? Experiments are all the mechanical characterization techniques like compression, tension, cyclic loading, all sorts of experiments, shear loading, like using an indenter, finding out what are the properties of the material, right? Like, so all these things would be covered, as well as you will be looking at the computational modeling aspect. What if I want to make a finite element model or a design of a certain organ and assign the right material property to it? What is that right material property of a human lung, for example, right? All these details would be discussed in detail, how to derive and extract the right material properties and how to use it rightly in the applications. The state of the art of the mechanical testing of cadaveric soft tissues will be presented. So cadaver is typically a dead body, like this is what is usually used, taken from a morgue, and there are a lot of testing which is done on a human cadaver based on certain ethical clearance and ethical approvals from the major institute which you are a part of. And based on this tissue testing, then now you can validate whatever properties you have with a cadaver. But that also has a lot of caveats, like the tissue should not be very old, it should be a fresh cadaver and things like that. So everything around a cadaveric soft tissue will be explained in detail, and what to extract from there and what not to, those things will be covered, right? Also, the design and development of soft tissue mimics or simulants will be described, which will allow mechanical testing in the future to be conducted without any ethical and biosafety issues. So this is a very exciting area and very close to my heart. I've been working on this for the past 10 years or so. This is known as making simulants or mimics or artificial soft tissues. So these are not implantable artificial soft tissues per se, but these are like synthetic versions of a soft tissue which basically you can carry in a pocket and you don't need any ethical approval to work with it. Like for using a cadaver tissue, for example, many of you are part of research labs, whether you're a doctor some capacity or you're working as a biomedical engineer, you know how difficult the ethical approvals are. You have to convince an ethics committee that why do you want to do this research, how the samples will be collected, how they would be stored. There's so many modalities into steps involved, right? But think about if all of this is taken care by some synthetic material which behaves exactly like that tissue. So this is what I'm going to talk to you at length. in this course that how to make soft tissue simulants which are very similar to the natural tissue and how to use them for different applications. Applications can range from biomechanical testing to ballistic testing to all kinds of defense based testing, as well as to the testing in the outer space, right? And also testing for making different wearable devices as well as apparels like shoes and different wearable items, as well as like you are also using it for testing medical implants, right? So if a medical implant is to be tested like a needle, what is the right tissue platform? You either test it on a cadaver, or can you produce a tissue mimic which is similar to that, where you can poke a needle and have the same feel or have the same forces. So how do you figure those things out? So this is going to be a very exciting topic here. Then the next thing is practical tools such as finite element modeling. So many of us have heard this term widely. If you're involved in some form of biological engineering or healthcare engineering, the term finite element modeling. What is this modeling technique? We will get into the very depth of it and understand from a very simple basic standpoints, right? Assuming nobody knows anything about this, that how do we start building a finite element model and how this could be widely used for applications where experiments would fail, right? Then the next part is we'll also introduce a very interesting technique which is known as digital image correlation. This uses advanced and sometimes very simplistic imaging modalities to capture images during a test and kind of correlate and generate a localized strain field or stress field, what is happening inside a certain component, right? So let's say there is a bullet which is going to hit a particular person and creates a wound. So what is happening while the bullet is hitting this particular person in a particular region? What is happening at those different instances? How is the tissue getting ruptured? Because if we do not have this knowledge, we will not be able to develop armors and various personal protective equipment. So digital image correlation is widely used in the industry for like metals and all kinds of very hard materials, but in soft tissue domain it is kind of a new concept. It has been evolving for the past 5 or 10 years, and we are very actively working in this area. So I would like to introduce this digital image correlation technique, which you can do with a very expensive machinery as well as do it with a simple mobile phone. How to do that for your research, right, will be introduced, and detailed case studies will be presented to investigate global and local soft tissue mechanics. What is happening in an entire soft tissue as a whole and what is happening inside. This is just very analogous to, like, let's say from outside I'm looking perfectly fine, but from inside maybe I have some disease or injury, right? So what is happening outside may not properly explain what is happening inside. Similar with the soft tissue, we need to understand the outside and inside both, right? Then the next part is we will switch gears and dive a little bit into some math, simple math, application based. We will talk about something which is known as a hyperelastic characterization models. This will be presented for modeling the properties of soft tissues accurately and which can be reproduced worldwide, right? So we may see in normal materials, if you have worked with any materials or seen a material test, you may see there is a linear kind of a function or a line which can basically capture or simulate how the stress strain plot is, or a stress strain graph is, right, or a force deformation graph is in these kind of materials, right? But in soft tissues they behave very differently. They have a highly non-linear profile for the stress strain profile. So how do we simulate that non-linear profile? If we cannot simulate it, nobody else across the world can use the data which I have produced as a part of my research or preliminary study, right? So we will understand how to speak a common language when we talk about soft tissue properties, and that is through understanding of the hyperelastic characterization techniques. This will also be taught from scratch with no preliminary expertise or any understanding required, right? So the next part is tissue injury and failure. So understanding the tissue is all great. Okay. Sure. Yeah. So understanding the tissue is all great, like we want to understand the tissue properties, the healthy tissue properties, but what is the overall application? We are trying to understand two things in this entire regime. One is injury, second is disease. What happens to the tissue properties when it is under some form of an injury? It could be localized injury or a holistic injury or different modes of injury. It could be a ballistic injury or a soft tissue kind of rupture and things like that. And what happens in case of a disease? Say there is a particular disease like liver cirrhosis. What happens to the liver in that case? What is the biomechanics or the mechanics or the soft tissue properties in that case? So these are some of the things we would try to learn from a tissue engineering and a tissue injury and failure perspective, that what is happening with the soft tissue. And medical device tissue interactions will also be studied. Like I've taken the example of the needle. Every medical device which you're implanting within the human body, they have to be tested against some kind of a human body platform before they're clinically approved, right? So rather than doing that on a cadaver or an actual patient, we could do that with some soft tissue simulants, or if we understand the properties, using a computational model, which saves all the ethical components and all the cumbersome components of your research, right? So if you're working in any of these research areas related to healthcare domain, you will understand very clearly what ethical approvals are, how difficult they are sometimes to obtain, and how that can really delay your research and other kind of works, whether you're part of a biomedical device company or a medical device industry. You will also face the same at a much more greater scale. You have to comply with several regulation and compliances worldwide, right? So a lot of this can be taken care of, like if we understand the different aspects of the soft tissue properties, and probably how we can simulate those, as well as study the different effects of injury and disease, right? So a range of applications of soft tissue mechanics will be presented, that will cover the whole aspects of whether you are a person who works as a doctor or a research investigator in a small lab, to somebody who is part of a product development team for a medical device or a wearable device manufacturing in a big biomedical industry, right? Whether you're in any of this domain, or whether you're a doctor who is just trying to understand some mechanical properties, that if I'm going to poke this particular cerebral artery during the neurosurgery, what is the right amount of poking do I have to do? These kind of decisions a doctor will not understand. This is all based on their experience. So a very senior doctor will do this, right? But what about a young doctor? So if they understand the tissue properties well, what is the property of a diseased, normal and abnormal tissue, they'll be able to take these decisions much more maturely, right? So this knowledge overall will be extremely valuable, like I've indicated, for the biotech and biomedical engineers, doctors, across all the disciplines, because wherever you have the term healthcare, it cannot differentiate itself from soft tissues. You have some involvement of soft tissues this way or the other. If you have a healthcare topical cream, it is going on the skin, so skin is the soft tissue. If you have a surgery, it's going on a soft tissue, right? You have a liver surgery, you have a hernia surgery, everywhere soft tissue, multitude of soft tissues are involved, right? Whether you are working with a medical device which is implantable, again soft tissue. So soft tissue cannot be taken out of the healthcare domain. So that's why understanding this and taking an involvement and active part in this course would be very, very important and a game changer for your understanding of soft tissue properties, right? For medical device manufacturers, biomaterials and biosciences researchers. So there are a lot of groups across the country and abroad who are working in the area of biomaterials, development of novel biomaterials for coating of certain implants, materials for high biocompatibility, absorbable stents, absorbable sutures. The names are endless. All these researchers, all these stakeholders in the healthcare industry uh, would highly benefit from the contents of this course. So with that, I would like to introduce myself again. So I'm Professor Arnab Chanda. I'm an assistant professor at the Center for Biomedical Engineering at IIT Delhi. And I'm also jointly involved with the Department of Biomedical Engineering at AIIMS Delhi. So I have several labs in AIIMS Delhi where we work with different soft tissue projects. And my core expertise is in soft tissue mechanics. And I also think about soft tissue mechanics not only from a basic standpoint, but how to take this from the lab to market and to also integrate the knowledge into products and how to apply that into entrepreneurial ventures. Okay. So that being said, I'm also founder and scientist of a company, Biofit Technologies LLC in the US, and I'm also in the process of registering my own company in India, which will also have components of the soft tissues, right? So this is my email here. You're welcome to reach out to me if you have any questions, right? So with that, let's dive into the contents and the course outline. What can you expect in the upcoming weeks as far as the contents are concerned? So let's get started. So the first module would focus on the introduction to soft tissues, right? We want to understand it from a very basics level, like what are soft tissues, how do we look at soft tissues, is it uh, something which we look at from a macro scale, or is it a micro scale, or we look at from the perspective of a tissue at under a microscope, or tissue which we can hold in hand. So different aspects of that. What are the major type of tissues and their properties? So what tissues are there from the head to toe? We may think of like skin, brain, liver, heart, lungs. These are common, but there are so many other forms of tissues, ligaments, cartilages, which are also soft tissues, different organs which are sticking around with 5 different cartilages, and like different forms of ligaments and whatnot. So they are all different soft tissues, and they go across. If you pull up any of the anatomy, like if you just search anatomy of the human foot, you will automatically see this 10 or 15 different soft tissues which are mentioned, which may be very confusing. We don't want to understand about all of them, but we want to at least get a nice overview of what soft tissues are of concern from the head to toe, right? So that's what the first module will talk about. It will talk about skin, muscles, and all sorts of connective tissues, right? We'll also briefly touch upon the anatomy and the biomechanical properties of tissues in the functional organs, such as brain, lungs, heart, blood vessels, and the extremities. How have we picked up this particular organs and the extremities? These are typically the organs or the soft tissues which are exposed to injuries and diseases. So there could be a lot of soft tissues like ligaments and certain cartilages which are not involved in diseases or injuries. So we are very keenly focused on the applications. We want to only focus on the soft tissues from the head to toe, understand an overview, and help us gain that knowledge to apply it in different applications, right? So next module would be the biomechanical testing methods in much more depth. We'll be talking about in vivo techniques. In vivo techniques basically means in live, something like live animal models or live human models. How do you apply the test methods and get the right properties out? Examples are indentation, imaging based techniques like a CT scan, MRI scan. These are all in vivo techniques, but do they give us the material properties? Maybe not, right? In vitro techniques, there are certain techniques in vivo also which will give you reverse form of material properties. They'll be looked at. In vitro techniques involve uniaxial, biaxial, cyclic loading, flat fatigue loading testing, and there are other forms like shear loading and things like that which will be covered in depth, right? So what happens when the tissue is just stretched this much, and what happens when you are constantly running as an athlete and your particular heel, which there is a thing called calcaneal fat pad which is at the bottom of your foot heel, that is getting through a cyclic loading and unloading, and it is getting damaged after, let's say, 20,000 cycles. What happens in that case? How do we analyze that? How do we repair that? How can we predict what are the right number of cycles till which you should run and then you should take rest, right? How do we devise a shoe or an insole around this particular problem. So all these things together comes around this understanding of the biomechanical testing methods, right? Next module is test protocols for soft tissues. We will be looking at linear and nonlinear mechanical properties in depth. What properties at what conditions are linear and what properties at what conditions become nonlinear. We'll also look at the effect of the test conditions such as the specimen size. So if I take a small piece of tissue from my arm versus a small piece of tissue from my forehead, is it going to behave that very similarly? I'm talking about skin. Or is it going to behave very differently? Answer to that is no, it is going to behave very, very differently. If I take a much more thicker sample versus a thinner sample, how it is going to behave, right? If I take a square sample versus a circular sample, how is that going to behave under a mechanical test? So all these differentiations can only be understood through the study of the variations in the specimen size. Another aspect which is very important is strain rates. Strain rate is how quickly I am applying a load to a particular tissue. So let's say I am doing a brisk walking versus I am doing a normal walking versus I am running. So the loading rates for my heel is very different in these three aspects, right? That will change the material property or the load response, which is the stress strain response which you're looking at, right? So we will be looking at the effect of strain rate, which becomes really important whenever we talk about soft tissues, right? And also loading orientation. How am I going to test it? So if I put my brain like, let's say I have a brain model or a cadaveric brain, if I place the brain like this versus this, is it going to behave very similarly in terms of material properties? Why would I do that? Because let's say in a some form of a contact sport or a ballistic injury to a military person like who is wearing a helmet, the bullet can come from here, the bullet can come from here, it can come from several different directions. Does the head showcase or exhibit the same properties in this direction versus that direction? So that's a matter of orientation. So soft tissues are very much orientation specific. They're typically known as highly anisotropic tissues. We'll get into the depth of what these terms and terminologies are, and it will get more and more clear. I'll be assuming that everybody is learning this from scratch, so just bear with me. The next topic would be, we will be looking at mechanical testing with cadaveric tissues. How do you test with a cadaver? What are the ethical considerations? What are the correct protocols? We do this every now and then, so we are in the right position to tell you what is right and what is wrong, right? Biosafety considerations. Can you take a piece of tissue and put it in your fridge where you keep your food? Probably not. There are certain protocols and guidelines which has to be followed, and also with the disposing of, right, of that tissue, because this can contaminate certain things, this can cause diseases if tissue rots and things like that. So a lot of ethical considerations are in place. If you are looking at countries like the US and Europe, you have to very, very stringently adhere with the ethical guidelines. Even in India, this is getting enforced more and more. But there are cases where we may not be aware of the ethical considerations. So this is a good time to get aware of that, right? Next part is we want to look at in module 5 the development of soft tissue simulants for experiments. We want to talk everything about how can we make synthetic tissue models similar to the actual tissue, and this is very exciting for me. From the head to toe, can I make a brain tissue simulant model and carry in my pocket? Don't have to take any ethical clearance and test this in, let's say, a particular lab for some research, right? I'm looking at the shear loading or something, or a loading due to a contact sport, or loading due to hitting of a ballistic on this, right? So how do I create this soft tissue simulants? What are the key protocols, key materials, fabrication techniques? We'll be talking about very interesting techniques like additive manufacturing or 3D printing. How can we use that for making the soft tissue simulants? And then we will be talking about the mechanical testing methods of the same, right? So soft tissue simulants, as I've already mentioned, this is going to be a game changer in the world in terms of surgical training as well as testing. This can help us develop certain testing standards. Think about a surgeon just suturing a particular wound, like with a particular suture style that is based on the experience of the surgeon, right? So surgeon A versus surgeon B, who has a 30 years experience versus 5 years experience, is going to suture in a very different way. We are moving slowly towards the world of robotic surgeries, and we are talking about AI in every dimensions, right? Like, so how do we give this information of the surgeon's experience to the robot? This can only be done through some standardization. That can we standardize certain methods where there's this much amount of force, these many number of sutures, this is the material property. These kind of decisions can only be taken if we have materials to test those sutures and surgical techniques, right? Or in a defense setting, what should be the right thickness of a helmet and what should be the right material properties of a helmet so that it can prevent a bullet from hitting the head and a military person dying, right? How can we save that from happening? By knowing the properties, soft tissue properties, how it interacts with the helmet, right? So this can be highly beneficial by avoiding the cadaver, like in future by building soft tissue simulants. So this is what I'm going to talk at length, and I work in this area for quite a bit. So like for last 7 or 8 years, and it's just been an area of quite a big interest in the research area. The next part which I would introduce is the finite element modeling of soft tissues. Without introducing this, the knowledge of soft tissue properties cannot be complete. Finite element modeling is very widely used in the industry for crash testing, for building testing and things like that, but they have been very actively used in the past 10 to 15 years in soft tissue mechanics, understanding the soft tissue and the medical device interaction and things like that. So we'll be talking about geometry creation, material properties, meshing, loads, boundary conditions. These are some terms and terminologies I'm going to explain to you, right? We'll talk about the simulations and results analysis on ANSYS as well. It's not only about nice simulation, how do we analyze and find the right results? That's also very important, right? We will also be next talking about the digital image correlation technique, which I've just explained. We'll be looking at the localized strains and stress distribution through imaging techniques, very simplified imaging techniques. We will be understanding the test protocols, measurement techniques, and post-processing methods. We'll be also looking at comparison of DIC based solutions with the finite element simulations. This is typically a way to validate that a finite element or a computational model is throwing out the right results. That's very, very important. If we do not have a validation for those models, one change of value can completely jeopardize the results and show some results which do not even make any scientific sense, right? So if you're working with computational models in the industry or as a part of any research group, you need to understand the importance of validation of computational models. Working with soft tissues which are extremely nonlinear, the models can give very, very erratic results. So that is where we have to learn about how to validate it rightly with digital image correlation, right? Next, in module 8, we will be discussing hyperelastic material models at length. We'll be talking about some of the very important models like Mooney-Rivlin, Ogden models. If you're from the biomechanics background, you would have heard about these models, but if you're not, I'm going to introduce this from the scratch, right? Strain energy density functions and derivation of stress strain equations from uniaxial loading. This is what we are going to talk about. We will talk about isotropic, transversely isotropic, and anisotropic hyperelastic models. What are these terms? Isotropic, transversely isotropic, and anisotropic. This will all be explained properly, right? How do you curve fit, or how do you fit within these models the experimental data? This will also be explained with hands-on exposure, right? The next module would be on soft tissue degradation modes and changes due to tissue weakening. What happens with the soft tissue when the tissue ages or the person ages, or when a person encounters an injury? what happens if I have a huge burn injury on my arm? Is the skin property which is going to grow after this burn going to have the same property, or the burn skin has a similar property? So these are some questions to be answered. We will understand that through understanding of the injuries, different forms of the injuries and the diseases. What happens to the tissue in that aspect? What happens with age? So our tissues, skin gets wrinkled, right? So what is that wrinkling of the tissue, wrinkling of the skin? What exactly is going to happen? It's because of the loss of tension in the skin. So all these details and practical examples we'll understand through understanding of the tissue property changes, right? Study of impact loads. So one is we are just testing something normally with a static or a small little load. One is like what happens in different impacts. All of a sudden, if I have a head impact or I fall down, or there is a brush with something like a metal bar, so what happens to the tissue, right? Effect of fractures or wounds and healing of the soft tissue properties. How does soft tissues heal back to its original? From a mechanics or a mechanical or an engineering standpoint, what happens in that? We will not delve a lot into the biological aspect, but talk about it from a very applications or device development aspect, right? So we are focused towards the industry and the academics, that we want to build devices, build research applications around this knowledge. Finally, we will study the interaction of soft tissues with interventions and medical devices. Medical device industry is booming in the Indian context, and the government of India is funding a lot of medical devices, and they're setting up regulations, rules, all those protocols are coming around, and understanding the soft tissue properties which is going to interact with medical devices is a must, right? Effect of suturing, which I was just talking about, implantation, penetration, these are some different terminologies which we are going to use. Frictional interactions. So the shirt which I am wearing, what kind of property does the shirt have which will make sure that it is not itchy on my skin? Of course, you may say cotton or a certain kind of material, but you don't get pure cotton or a pure synthetic materials these days. There has been a lot of innovation in the textile space, right? So what is the right amount of frictional interaction which will not cause me harm to my body? If I am wearing a shoe, what is the right frictional interaction so that I do not get a blister or an ulcer on my foot? So these kind of interactions will study with the soft tissues. Soft tissue here being the foot or the skin, right? And then you have a product which is the shoe or the shirt which is interacting with it, right? We will talk about specific case studies, analysis, challenges, and prospects in these areas. So as a summary, through this course, we will in depth learn about all the experimental techniques about soft tissue, like in this picture here on the top right, where you're looking at a brain model, brain simulant model, which is tested under compression. And this is to simulate some realistic compression test, right? Where there is a certain fall or certain pressure to the head, and what happens, when will it lead to fracture, things like that. So everything we are going to learn from the soft tissue to its different applications. Okay, next example here is you're looking at a computational model of a human body. The outside part is comprising of all the soft tissues, and the inside has all the skeletal models, and then you this is exposed to a blast kind of loading, which you cannot do it with a cadaver or a normal human. You can only that do this kind of loading environments on a computational, on not in an experimental model that easily. It is done experimentally as well with human certain dummies and all, but they are not that good or that well representative of the human body. So how do you understand through this blast simulation what is happening due to this blast in your eye, in different components of your brain, in different parts of your body? All these details will be understood in great depth by the end of this course, right? So this is as a summary, and this is the course outline which we are going to follow. So talking about the reference books, these are the two books which we are going to refer as a part of this course. So the first is known as Mechanical Properties of Human Tissues. Here you will find majority of the components which I am going to teach in this part of this course already outlined, and they will be they are there for your disposal. This book is available on Amazon, and you can look at other aspects. There are e-books and a lot of subscriptions from the institutes where this can be brought about. The next book is Materials for Biomedical Simulation. These are talking about the different material properties and other aspects while they are being used in a simulation or a computational model. So both these books, the first one more and the second one less, would be your reference books for the course, right? Okay, so let's talk about a very brief introduction. Why do we want to understand soft tissues? Why do we want to learn about soft tissues? I've already given you some insights, but let's talk about it more, right? So the first area in which soft tissues are very, very important are mechanics and mechanobiology of tissues, right? So whenever you are looking at the human bones, bones are always connected with some soft tissues to perform certain tasks. So skeleton, for example, the human skeleton, which is comprising of all the bones and like all the passive kind of aspects, like which we do not control, they are all controlled through soft tissues in order to activate. So when I'm raising this hand, the bone is not raising the hand. I am basically signaling my brain that please activate the neurons or the other aspects and tell the hand muscles or the hand soft tissues to raise the hand, and that is what is caused, and the bones are just a structure. So whatever I'm doing here, raising my hand, doing any sort of activities, are done through soft tissues, right? So that's why understanding soft tissue is very, very important. Second is, if you are working in the area of biomaterials, you have to understand soft tissues, because biomaterials are all built around soft tissues. They are either mimicking a soft tissue or deriving some aspects of a soft tissue. You have to understand soft tissues. If you are trying to understand cells, then the cells will of course form together a tissue. So the cell has an effect from a multi-scale perspective on the tissue. So you have to again understand soft tissues, right? If you are working on the dynamics of motion, if you are involved in human motion analysis, whether you are from the industry which looks at some wearable technologies or technologies for the human gait or better improvement, posture improvement, or foot insoles or shoes or any kind of aspects which the human wears, right? Or you are looking at the dynamics of the motion, that has everything to do with soft tissue, like I've just explained. They are not being done by the bones, they're done by the soft tissues like muscles, right? So human motion. Next is biomimetics. Biomimetics is a area in which we are, these are broad areas of research, and many of you may be aware of it. So I'm just going to explain what biomimetics is. Biomimetics originally was derived from adapting the different techniques with which the animal world or the plant world is having already, and we want to adapt that into our existing technologies. One example is how a snake kind of maneuvers or goes from one place to another, like the snake skin. That structure of the snake skin is now taken into account in certain technologies for certain robots and whatnot, right? Or a turtle shell, how the structure of the turtle shell is. Of course we cannot be going there and taking out turtle shells, so that's not ethically correct. So, but we can adapt the properties of the turtle shell in certain armors, right? So that is the area of biomimetics, where again the soft tissue understanding is very, very important, right? Third is robotics, where any kind of robotic arm where it is doing any sort of applications, it has to do something with the soft tissues, because it is either trying to simulate some doctor's movements, or it is some trying to simulate certain movements which the humans or the animals do, right? Next is, if you are looking in the area of biofluids or modeling or computational modeling, be it respiratory mechanics, hemodynamics, lung mechanics, you're looking at the heart functioning, you're trying to create an artificial heart model, or you're working in medical devices, again, you cannot leave away soft tissues. The figure here on the very bottom left shows basically the muscles which are connected with the rib cage and the top part of your shoulder, and these are giving all the ranges of motions. Of course your bones have certain degrees of freedom, so I cannot twist my arm beyond this, right? So certain constraints and degrees of freedoms are there, but the skeleton just gives a structure. If I don't have right neuronal setting, what happens in a paralysis, right? you're not able to activate your muscles to raise your arm, right? So soft tissues are involved in all these aspects. Another reason why you want to study soft tissue mechanics is tendons, blood vessels, elastic cartilages. Whether you are a person who is taking blood from somebody's arm to do a regular blood test, you also need to understand the soft tissue. You may be poking a person in 5 different places to find their vein, right? You need to understand soft tissue, where is the right place to poke and what is not to be poked, right? So many biological tissues have evolved to perform specific mechanical functions, and that's how they are all put together. So here is a summary picture on the right side top, where you're looking at something which is known as a visible human database. So this is a database developed by the National Institutes of Health, US. This is known as the NIH. So NIH basically has created this very detailed body model of the entire human body, where small little organs, even small little teeth and other things like, are very discreetly defined. So you can use this to 3D print as well as make computational models. So for example, a finite element model of a foot, where you have a fibrous structure, a bony structure, you want to apply certain loads, you want to look at what will happen if you have a insole interact with this foot. All these things which I'm going to cover, like as a part of your simulations, right, in the during this course. So this is going to be really exciting to look at the various aspects of the development of the different applications, right? Another aspect here is the gait muscle activity, where you're looking at the different aspects of how we are walking and running, that has everything to do with the soft tissues. So that's why, as a whole, you cannot take the soft tissue outside the picture if you're working in the healthcare domain, right? That's why understanding soft tissue is very, very important. The next reason why you want to understand soft tissue is because of the study of diseases, right? Let's talk about a few common diseases. Like let's say you are wearing a high heel. So I'm talking about the female population who was either wearing a high heel. The second is whether you have a flat feet condition, right? Or you have a high arch condition, or you have a foot pain. So these kind of aspects, where you are basically having some kind of a foot pain or some kind of a condition like that, where soft tissue understanding is very, very important. Here, one aspect of the cartilage or the ligament is very important, which is causing all this heel pain, which is known as a plantar fascia. That is a soft tissue. So if we can analyze the soft tissue, that what are the correct types of shoes or wearables you need to wear to not stretch it beyond the limits, you can reduce the pain, right? So this is one of the disease which is commonly known as plantar fasciitis, commonly understood as something which is occurring leading to heel pain, right? The treatment for this is like custom orthotics, like your insoles and orthotics. There are certain treatment modalities like shock treatment, and there are so many like physiotherapy kind of treatments. But what is not understood is the science of why that soft tissue is getting into that aspect of pain. We are trying to correct it using all the modalities, but let's say you are working with the footwear industry. If you have this knowledge of why this particular foot pain is occurring, this can only come from the knowledge of the soft tissue, how that soft tissue is behaving, right? This is what we are going to learn in the course, right? Next example here is of a, you are looking at a image of you're looking at the bottom left, you're looking at an image of a cerebral aneurysm. So cerebral arteries are arteries of the brain, and sometimes what happens is there are certain locations in these arteries where it becomes a weak spot, and there is a bulge which happens, right? So now the blood pressure, due to the blood pressure, this bulge keeps on growing because of the weak spot, and after a certain point this may damage. If you have encountered some kind of an impact, or you've fallen down the stairs, or something has happened, and this can create a brain hemorrhage, internal bleeding, and this can cause you to take a brain surgery or something like that, right? So this is what the cerebral aneurysm part is. Aneurysm is that bulge. So how do we analyze through a imaging? Can we analyze through just a two-dimensional imaging what is happening with that bulge? Maybe not. We need some three-dimensional models to deeply understand what is happening in terms of the tissue, what is happening in terms of the fluid, which is blood in this case, which is interacting with the tissue. So this aspect again has the importance of soft tissue understanding. Next example is the lung. Many of us have faced or have suffered from COVID very recently. So we know the oxygen levels have gone down, right? We were measuring using an oximeter very often, and this all of us can relate to. What was happening exactly? So there was certain build up of, you know, tissue growth or mucus growth in certain places within the lungs alveoli. Alveoli is the end point where, which are the small sacs within your lungs, which is deoxygenating all your like air and all that, and sending the oxygen into the body and things like that. So that component was getting clogged, and that will cause a difficulty in breathing and difficulty in inhaling enough oxygen. The lung is again a soft tissue. So if somebody understands soft tissue very precisely, that what may happen as the main reason what this COVID is causing, they may administer the right medicine or the right treatment modality, right, for this particular domain. We are all, of course, focused on the vaccines and other things. Those are all great, but also understanding the soft tissue aspect, what is happening at that alveoli level from a soft tissue standpoint when a COVID virus strikes or there is a common cold and cough, what is exactly going on, that will help us administer the right medicine rather than taking all this random medicines. I do this very personally. Whenever I have cold and cough, the first thing which I do is take a Dolo 650 or take a Combiflam or take some random cough syrups or take a vitamin C, or in some cases I would take a Benadryl or some cough syrup, right? So these kind of random things sometimes can lead to even aggravation of your condition. So if I understood the soft tissue very well, then from a product development standpoint, if I am the drug developer or I am a person who is looking at the science of this from a research standpoint, I can administer better interventions, right? Another example is liver. We have commonly heard about the term fatty liver. Fatty liver eventually can become a cirrhotic liver, which is an extreme amount of fat deposits, and that can lead to a liver cancer, right? What is happening here is again the soft tissue. The soft tissue is constantly changing here due to the disease, and because of that there is a shift and change in the stiffness of the tissue, and that is finally leading to a terminal disease like cancer and things like that, right? So coming back to this, so this cirrhotic liver, if we understand the crux of it like that, what is the soft tissue change which is occurring, and we can catch this way before it becomes cancerous, right, through the right medications, or whenever you're placing the right medication inside, like what is the change which it is causing? Is it changing the tissue to come back to its original, or there is some other changes? So these kind of things have to be looked at in depth from a biologist or a doctor standpoint by understanding the soft tissue mechanics which is going inside, right? Skin. So whenever there is scarring or wounding of the skin, what kind of healing mechanism is it happening in a adult, in an infant, in an old age person? The healing is very different, right? Or with a person with diabetes, right? So all these diseases are linked around the simple soft tissue skin, right? So a simple skin wound can manifest itself in very different forms in me versus you, right? So this kind of things have to be understood from a soft tissue standpoint, that what are the different aspects which are contributing to the healing of that soft tissue, and if there is a huge wound, how can I suture or stitch it in the right way to make sure that this wound heals in the right time frame and whatnot. Skin grafting is when there is a huge burn or scalding, like, how do you cover that place with the graft? These are some of the case studies we'll be covering, but this is what we need to why we need to understand the aspects of soft tissue, that what is the baseline property of the soft tissue and what is the property of the diseased tissue. If there is a huge difference, we will now understand how the disease have evolved and how the tissue properties have changed. Then we can take the right decisions, that this is what typically happens. and these are some of the corrective measures. Brain, healthy brain versus neurological disorders, that kind of a brain. What are some of the changes in the tissue? We may think these are all outside, these are to be only seen from an imaging standpoint, or but everybody is neglecting the tissue itself. There are researchers who are working with the tissue and trying to find out what is the condition of a Alzheimer's specific brain, or a brain which has undergone some hemorrhage or damage. So there are changes in the tissue stiffness which are very clear when there is a brain disease, such as there is a fibrotic scar in the neurological disorder, scar due to aging, scar due to traumatic brain injury, and demyelination, right? Like there are a lot of terms, neurodegeneration, and these are some of the terms which are commonly heard, right? So again, if we go to the human heart, these are all very important organs. If you look at a young heart versus a diseased heart versus a old heart, they are very different in the soft tissue properties, right? So that's why understanding whether, let's say, a person is going to is not getting the right beats of the heart and he or she needs a pacemaker, what is exactly happening with the tissue of the heart, that can give us a lot of insights into improvising this kind of devices, medical devices, by having a better scientific basis, right? The other examples are vasculatures, like we have a clot in the human artery, like due to some calcification, whatnot. There needs to be a stent which goes in. How do we look at this particular stent? What are the properties of the tissues in which the stent is going in? Is it going to scratch that tissue and create some inflammation, or is it the right side stent? So a lot of these decisions can only be taken when we understand the properties of that artery. Artery is very complex. I'm going to explain in the coming weeks, like where an artery has three layers of tissues with extremely anisotropic fiber orientations. If you pick small portion of artery from here to there, they are going to behave very differently. So that's why understanding of the soft tissue is very, very important. Next example is study of injuries, which I was just talking about this blast loading. Think about this blast loading. You are looking at, let's say, loading of a passenger within a car. So if you're looking at the vehicle standards, like vehicle crash testing standards, whatever nice car you are driving, if you crash it at like even 40 kilometers per hour into a tree or somewhere, it's going to cause huge damage. Probably it will deploy your airbags and other details, like those things are okay, but it can really cause some damage. So can something be developed? Let's say you are an automotive engineer. Can something be developed which is part of the bonnet of the or the front part of the car, which can absorb the right amount of energy when you encounter an accident at, let's say, an 80 kilometers per hour, and doesn't transfer enough amount of the energy or the impact to the passengers? How can this be developed? Can you just develop this by studying the car? No, you cannot. You can only develop this by having the passenger integrated with the car as a simulation model. Can you have a passenger sit within a car and crash that car? No, you cannot. That is unethical, right? So you cannot do that kind of experiments, but you can do that computationally. Similar with the blast. You can look at so many aspects that, let's say, this is this new blast preventive armor which the defense sector has developed, and this particular person is wearing that. What happens if the blast is happening at 1 meter, landmine blast? What is happening if the landmine blast is at 50 centimeters? What are the differences in that? Will I survive that as a military person wearing this particular armor? This can only be studied using computational models. Or within that car, can I survive if I encounter a 80 kilometers per hour crash? Can be only understood through understanding of the different soft tissue properties, how they are behaving as a part of this entire impact condition. So the impact is happening initially to the car, followed by the impact getting transferred to the passenger, followed by the impact getting transferred to the different soft tissues. As my head hitting the windshield, that could be a brain damage condition. Is my feet hitting somewhere, or is my like elbow hitting somewhere, or there is some back injury or rib injury? Is my rib hitting the steering? There are so many aspects of the dynamics, right, which needs to be understood. And based on that hitting, what is happening inside? Is my lung getting damaged? Is something else getting damaged? So all these different aspects can be very beautifully studied with computational modeling techniques. Many of you may get really interested in research, that's my hope, by understanding the soft tissue mechanics as well, if you're very new to this area, right? So this gives us a very brief introduction of why soft tissues, and hopefully I've clarified that for any kind of healthcare aspect you need to understand soft tissues. For diseases, for injuries, understanding of the soft tissue properties in normal diseased or injured conditions are very, very important. So now let's delve into the introduction of soft tissues, right? So how do we look at soft tissues from an application standpoint? Soft tissue has a lot of things. It has cells, like different layers of cells, tissues, and like fibers and other things. But we look at soft tissue from an engineering perspective like this. We look at soft tissue like a composite. So what is a composite material? So typically a composite material in the market is known as a material which has fibers and a matrix. So fibers embedded within a matrix kind of material. Why are composite materials popular in the industry? They use for aerospace application, making the bats, cycles, bicycles, and so many other products lighter. Composite materials are typically used for having certain nicely manufactured properties, where the fiber orientation or the kind of fiber property which you have, fiber gives the overall strength to the composite, and the matrix gives the addition and the overall integrity to the composite, right? So just like a composite material which has fibers embedded within a matrix, we look at soft tissue as a soft composite. Soft composite basically has soft fibers within a softer matrix. So in an actual composite, like a metal matrix composite or a civil engineering composite or a textile composite, it has carbon fibers within a very soft, like jelly like epoxy matrix or something like that. Soft tissue is like that. This has very similarly collagen or elastin fibers which are much more softer, very, very soft, within a much more softer extracellular matrix. So the fibers are a little stronger than the softer matrix. So you have soft fibers within a softer matrix. This is an example. If you look at the human heart is also like a soft composite, like any other soft tissue. You can think of human heart as an array of fibers which are not only occurring in different layers but are also going in different orientations. So there is a certain orientation like this, and it changes orientation. So one of my project back in the day was to dissect 30 to 35 goat hearts, because they were it was part of a research project. So I would basically take a goat heart and kind of anatomically cut it in certain places and open this heart and look at the fiber properties. So these fibers were distinctly placed, and I could identify certain principal fiber directions. But the crux is this: so you have fibers in different layers going in different directions, very complex setting. So this fibers form the softer soft fibers, and then this is all integrated within a softer matrix, which is the heart matrix, and you finally see the human heart. So let's very quickly talk about the different soft tissues which we are going to study. I'm going to take an overview. This is my last slide, and we will continue on this. So we are going to talk about soft tissues. This is the entire human body which you're looking at, such as facial, eye, nasal, oral, gray and white matter, cerebellum, spinal cord, salivary glands, lymph nodes, trachea, heart, lungs, liver, mammary glands, cardiac muscles, stomach, gallbladder, pancreas, skin, skeletal muscles, spleen, small intestine, all these different soft tissues. Many of this you may have heard, many of this you may not, right? Kidney, colon, appendix, pelvic, urinary bladder, ovary, fat, thigh, bone marrow, ligament, and tendon. These are the array of soft tissues which we are going to study as a part of this course. We will slowly move into the soft tissues domain, understand each and every of this all of the soft tissues, and then dive into their mechanical properties. So with this, I would like to thank you, and we will continue this in the next lecture and look more into the soft tissue characterization and applications. Thank you all.